Settle in. The night is quiet. You hear only the faint crackling of a fire, the gentle rustle of old parchment, maybe a breeze slipping under a wooden door. Wherever you are, dim the lights, get comfortable. You're in safe company now. Tonight, we walk softly through the long corridors of time. Not toward greatness, but toward hardship. Toward the worst of it. And it begins not in a throne room or battlefield, but in a mud hut, somewhere bleak, cold, dangerous, a place so challenging that just surviving the day was a minor miracle. Because for all the glories of human history, the pyramids, the Renaissance, the Apollo missions, there have also been centuries so cruel, so unforgiving, that waking up each morning was less a blessing and more a cosmic dare. Let's go to one of them now. Chapter 1. A fire in the dark, life at the edge of existence. It's around 536 CE, and if there was ever a year that might make you wish you'd never been born, this one is near the top. A cold haze hangs in the air, gray, unnatural. The sun rises, but barely, casts no warmth. In Constantinople, people think it's an omen. In Ireland, monks write of a failure of bread. And in China, snow falls in summer. Not a little. Inches. Why? Well, historians now believe this was the aftermath of a volcanic eruption, possibly from Iceland or maybe Indonesia, that threw so much ash into the sky it dimmed the sun for 18 months. Not metaphorically, literally. One Byzantine historian, Procopius, wrote, "During this year a most dread portent took place, for the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. Temperatures dropped worldwide, crops failed, people starved, across the globe, and yet the tragedy didn't visit in one grand swoop. No trumpet blast, no horsemen, just a slow, grinding frost that made each day harder than the last. Imagine waking up in that world. Your hut smells of damp straw and old sweat. Your clothes haven't dried since last season. Your children, quiet, too quiet, stare into the cold ash light, skin pulled tight against their bones. It's not just winter, it's despair. The elders say, we've seen famine before, but this feels different. Even the bread has turned to clay. The bark you grind into flour, your teeth crack on it. Relax for a moment. Feel the flicker of firelight on your eyelids. This is only history, and you're safe. But they weren't. In Ireland, the Annals of Ulster recorded a failure of bread in the year 536. Simple words, devastating consequences. That year and the two that followed likely saw millions perish across Europe and Asia. This wasn't just bad weather. It was the climate breaking. And then, when hope seemed impossible to find, nature gave them something new. Disease. Just 3 years later, in 541 CE, the first recorded outbreak of the plague of Justinian begins. Thought to be a strain of the same bacteria that caused the Black Death, it swept through Constantinople in a matter of weeks. Again, Procopius speaks. At that time there was a pestilence by which the whole human race came near to being annihilated. He wasn't exaggerating. Some estimates suggest 50 million people died, half the population of the Byzantine Empire. Picture that for a moment. 1 week you're tending goats, grumbling about grain. The next, half your village is dead or dying. The air stinks of decay. Even burying the dead becomes too dangerous. They pile bodies in cisterns, wells, and old churches. Priests walk the streets weeping, unable to keep up with last rites. Let the story carry you. Your breath is slow. The worst of the storm has passed, for now. But the 6th century had no intention of being done with you, because across the world, the Gupta Empire, once a golden light in India's history, is collapsing. War, economic decline, climate chaos. And in Central America, the Mayans begin a slow slide from unity into regional conflict. This isn't just one bad moment. It's a global low tide, a period some historians have called the darkest time in human history. And the worst part? Most people had no idea why it was happening. They only saw the effects. The sky turned gray, food vanished, death multiplied. The gods, it seemed, had turned away. But what did a normal day look like? Let's step into one. You're a young man in the Eastern Alps, maybe modern-day Slovenia. You wake up before the sun, mostly because you don't know if it's day or night. The sky's just dim. Your mother boils bark and roots. Tastes like old leather. Your sister used to sing when she fetched water. Now she barely hums. You haven't seen a fruit in 2 summers. The river's too shallow for fish. The goat gave up milk months ago. But today you're going into the woods. You heard a traveler pass through, selling dried apples and something called grain. The price? A blanket. You're only one. When you get there, the man's gone. The patch of road where he stood is trampled and stained dark. Something happened here. You turn and walk home, your stomach empty. That night, you fall asleep to the sound of wolves. Close your eyes for a second. Not everything in this century was horror. There were stories told by firelight, lullabies in old dialects, and moments of love. Even in famine, even in plague, people found ways to laugh. A girl in Thrace still made dolls from old linen. A bard in Gaul sang songs about distant lands, where the sun still shone. But the weight of existence was immense. And in many places, especially far from cities, people turned inward. Superstition surged. They blamed demons, foreign gods, witches, anything to explain the terrible silence of the world. But humanity endured. By the end of the 6th century, the sky finally cleared. The cold haze faded. Crops returned. Plague outbreaks slowed. In China, the Sui dynasty would rise. In Europe, a slow rebuilding began. And in the East, scholars began documenting the stars again. Not out of fear, but curiosity. Was it still hard? Absolutely. But when you've survived one of the worst times to ever be human, even the smallest spring feels like a golden age. Let that thought linger, that even in the cruelest centuries, we persevered. As you drift deeper into sleep, let the firelight of that world fade. There's more history ahead, but for now, rest. Let the hush of this forgotten century carry you. The first time they saw the sun again, truly saw it, golden and full above the frost-glittered treetops. There was no cheering, just silence. Some wept, some laughed, some simply stared, unsure if it was real or another hallucination brought on by fever and rot. After almost 2 years of murky twilight, that brightness in the sky seemed like a story someone else had told. A few fell to their knees and whispered prayers to whatever gods might still be listening. It wasn't joy, not exactly. More like awe, caution, as though the world might take it back. But that was always the way with ancient hardship. Even the blessings felt borrowed. As the fog of volcanic winter lifted and the first thin crops returned to the dirt, humanity began to crawl very slowly out of its shell. But the 6th century had left deep scars. In Scandinavia, the mythology of the time changed. Norse sagas began to speak of a sun-eating wolf, Skoll, who chased the sky. Many believe these stories were shaped by those years of darkness. If the sun disappeared, surely something must have devoured it. Even the Vikings hadn't yet risen to power, but the seeds of that cold and mystical worldview may have been planted right here, in the dim years when morning barely lit the frost. Further south, in the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine court still buzzed with life. But it was now a life lived under shadow. Emperors came and went. Justinian, once a figure of radiant ambition, watched his empire buckle beneath plague and cost. The Hagia Sophia, his shimmering jewel, echoed with fewer footsteps, fewer hymns. Meanwhile, those farthest from power, farmers, woodsmen, fishers, kept on breathing, just because that's what people do. Let's walk with one of them. Her name is Adela. She's 14 winters old and lives near what will one day be Bavaria. Her village was once 60 strong. It's 22 now. She has a chipped front tooth, a rag of a wool dress, and the most reliable pair of feet in her family. So she walks, often far, for firewood, wild onions, or the roots her uncle swears cure fever. Her brother coughs through the night. Her father hasn't spoken much since the spring when the plague took his sister. But Adela keeps moving, because if she doesn't, who will? One morning she returns with a rabbit, a real one, and the village gathers as if she were a queen. It's stewed in a cracked iron pot with grain husks and salt they bought with the last family heirloom. They call it a feast. And in that moment, as the steam rises and cheeks glow red again, it is. Let your breath slow now. You've seen the worst century they could remember. But for many, it was only the beginning. Because the hardship of history doesn't always come as a sudden blow. Sometimes it's a grinding wheel, constant, wearing, like walking barefoot across gravel for 100 years. Take, for example, France in the 14th century. Ah yes, the 1300s, a time when Europe seemed determined to fall apart in the most theatrical ways possible. Let's glance ahead a bit, not to skip, but to deepen the comparison. In 1315, the rains began. Not a gentle mist, not a spring drizzle. Relentless, hard, cold rain. And it didn't stop for over a year. What followed was the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. A brutal stretch in which crops failed, livestock drowned, and entire regions of Europe plunged into a desperate fight for survival. In one town, records say mothers were caught eating the flesh of their own children. In another, men turned to grave robbing for meat. Whether that's truth or exaggeration, one thing is certain. Starvation tests the soul. And when you combine it with disease, bad weather, and war, well, you've got the recipe for one of the worst times to ever be human. So what made the 1300s particularly cruel? Let's count the blessings in reverse. 1. Famine due to rain and crop failure. 2. Banditry because starving people do desperate things. 3. Plague, beginning in 1347. 4. War, most notably the 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453. 5. Religious panic as people tried to explain what divine punishment they had brought on. It was like the 6th century all over again, only with sharper swords and worse hygiene. But let's return to the sensory world. Let's feel the 1300s. The scent of moldy straw. The taste of rye bread with ergot fungus, yes, a common problem. A mild dose might make you nauseous. A heavy one, you hallucinate. Or die. They called it St. Anthony's fire. The sound of church bells tolling not for weddings, but for burials. Dozens. Daily. The clink of coins vanishing because even silver couldn't buy wheat that didn't grow. In the city of Tournai, Belgium, a medieval artist named Pierre Dotilt painted a scene in 1349. Robed figures digging graves, as corpses piled high, and next to them children watching. Let that image settle in. Not because we seek horror, but because understanding the worst of human history also helps us understand how much was overcome, and how much we, somehow, always manage to carry forward. You're doing well. Let your eyelids soften. Let the worst years drift past you. Now imagine being not just in a bad decade or century, but born into a class of people who were always at the bottom, regardless of the era. This brings us to the life of the medieval serf. Between the 9th and 15th centuries, the majority of European peasants were not free. They were bound to the land, bought and sold with it. A serf might be born in a cottage and never travel more than 10 miles from it in their entire life. No matter who sat on the throne, their world remained the same. Wake, milk the goats, tend the Lord's fields, cut firewood, pay taxes in grain, repeat, and if they were lucky, they had teeth by age 30. Let's meet one. His name is Tommaso. He's a Lombard peasant under the thumb of a local duke. His wife died last year of fever. His daughter tends to the sheep. His son is missing 2 toes from frostbite. One winter evening, he sits by a fire, so small it barely warms the knees, and eats leek soup with stale rye. And yet, he tells a story, one from his own father, a tale about a knight who fought a dragon, and a shoemaker who tricked a greedy priest. His daughter giggles. His son laughs too loud and drops the spoon. In that moment, for just a breath of time, they are not serfs. They are a family, warm, together, human. That's what endures, you see. Not just suffering, but the quiet resistance to it. The dignity of survival. The fierce, steady heartbeat of life. Even under the weight of misery. Even in the worst times to be human, people remained people. Silly, brave, foolish, funny, alive. And that's why this isn't just a story of famine or plague. is a story of endurance. Let that thought cradle you. There's more to explore still. And in our next chapter, we'll drift across oceans and centuries to other hard times. Tulip crashes, Viking winters, colonial catastrophes. But for now, close your eyes and let the murmur of the old world carry you gently towards sleep. You've walked through one of the hardest centuries. You're safe, you're warm, and we'll keep going. There's a soft wind curling through the reed roofs of Saxon huts tonight. You might hear it, if you listen gently enough, like a whisper through dry grass, brushing the edge of sleep. Let's step for a moment into one of those reed-covered homes. The year is 872, somewhere near what will one day be Cambridge. The air inside is thick with peat smoke. A baby cries in the corner, wrapped in a blanket stiff with last month's salt. The mother hums an old tune, not to soothe the baby, but herself. Her husband hasn't returned from tending the levee. The Danes were spotted upriver. Again, these were the days of the Viking incursions, when England wasn't England, but a patchwork of rival kingdoms. Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, each scrabbling for control, each dreading the longships on the horizon. For a commoner, there was no grand strategy, no war councils, just the sound of oars in the fog and the sudden, breathless knowledge that something terrible was coming. At times like these, you didn't measure the seasons in harvests. You measured them in burned villages, in how many men never came back, in whether or not the monastery downriver still had its bells. The Vikings came not as cartoonish horned raiders but as organized, seasoned warriors. Men who laughed and prayed, who told sagas over firelight. But to the people of East Anglia, they might as well have been phantoms. Let's say you're a young farmhand in 873. Your entire village hears the news. The Danes are wintering nearby. That alone is enough to send fear rippling through every hut. Wintering meant they weren't just raiding, they were staying. That meant they'd eat, steal, and conscript, possibly kill. You wonder, will they want bread? Iron? Will they take our daughter? You don't know. You just pray they don't see your smoke. Breathe. Let the imagined tension rise. Then fall away. You're here now. Only history remains. But these lived terrors weren't isolated. They layered. During these same years, famine still lingered like an unwanted guest. In Ireland, the annals speak of food shortages. In Frankish lands, the nobles hoarded grain while the peasantry pounded acorns into flour and chewed bark to suppress hunger. We often forget that in pre-modern Europe, the majority of people lived always on the edge of starvation. One bad harvest, just one, could plunge entire regions into chaos. But back to the Vikings. Let's look at one ironic reversal. Greenland. Today, it's a symbol of isolation. Cold, loneliness. But around 985 CE, Vikings from Iceland, led by Eric the Red, established settlements there. And for a time, they thrived. They farmed, traded walrus tusks, raised livestock, built churches. But the land was deceptive. The first settlers arrived during what scientists call the medieval warm period, a time when temperatures were mild enough for grazing and sailing. Then came the Little Ice Age. Slow, relentless. Starting around 1300, it chilled the North Atlantic, shortened growing seasons, and made trade routes more treacherous. By the 1400s, Greenland's Viking population had dwindled. The last written record from the eastern settlement comes from 1408, a marriage in a church. After that, silence. Imagine being the last priest in that cold stone chapel. Your congregation thinning year by year. No more ships from Iceland, just wind. And your own voice echoing in the frost. Here's a quote from a Norse rune stone, carved in despair. After the storm, the farm was lost, the cattle gone, snow to the eaves. May God show us the way. We'll never know if it was Greenland, but it could have been. That's the thing with history's worst times. They echo each other. Let's pause. Close your eyes. Feel warmth return. You're not in Greenland. You're not in 536. You're not waiting for Vikings. You're here, resting, listening. Let the gentle weight of blankets or silence hold you for a while. Back in continental Europe, the Black Death was still carving its name into the 14th century. By 1351, it had killed between 75 and 200 million people globally. A third of Europe gone. In cities like Florence and Paris, entire neighborhoods were emptied. In London, mass graves were dug at night, lanterns swaying over the dead. It got so bad, in Avignon, the Pope consecrated the entire Rhone River so bodies could be dumped without sacrilege. That's real. That happened. And it changed things. Not just population numbers, but psychology, belief, behavior. People turned to mysticism. Flagellants whipped themselves through the streets. Others drank and danced and gambled, certain the end was near. From it, though, came something unexpected. The labor shortage that followed gave peasants more bargaining power. Feudal bonds began to break. Wages rose. Suffering gave way, eventually, to transformation, just as it always does. Let's turn now to another continent. Because the worst time to be human isn't confined to Europe. Imagine being in Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, on August 13, 1521. The city is burning. The temples collapsing. Spanish swords gleam in the sunlight. For years, Tenochtitlan had been a jewel of the Americas. Lakeside canals, floating gardens, bustling markets. But now it's gone, crushed under the heel of conquistadors, smallpox, and betrayal. The Spanish had allies, of course, native peoples tired of Aztec domination. But in the end, it was disease that truly broke the empire. One Spanish chronicler wrote, "It was as though the gods had abandoned them. The dead lay so thick we walked upon them." Can you imagine? Your world crumbling not from famine or winter, but from another civilization entirely. Foreign ships, strange weapons, an invisible death. Within a century, up to 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas had vanished. Not all from war, mostly from disease, smallpox, measles, flu, a biological collapse. You might think that's the low point, but across the ocean, others were just entering theirs. Let's visit Russia, late 1500s. The rule of Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. It's 1570. The Tsar has just launched the massacre of Novgorod. He suspects treason. So he marches in with his personal army, the Oprichniki, black-cloaked riders with dog-head emblems, symbols of their loyalty and savagery. They rape, burn, torture. For days, tens of thousands die. Babies thrown into rivers, churches looted, bells silenced. One chronicler wrote, "The sky itself seemed to cry, but no mercy came, and all of it based on rumor, fear, the paranoia of a man with too much power and too little restraint." These are the lives history forgets. The girl in Greenland who never saw another ship. The monk in Constantinople who buried 10 of his brothers in 1 week. The Nawa boy who watched his city fall. The Novgorod woman whose child vanished during the night. No marble statues were made for them. No pages in school books. But tonight we remember them. Take a breath. The candle's still burning. The wind has eased. You've seen empires fall, plagues spread, skies darken. And yet, in every shadow, you've found the flicker of humanity. Of people who lived, mourned, laughed, and passed on stories. The worst time to be human? It depends how you define worst. Because even then, people loved. People hoped. People told stories. Just like this one. By now, you may be wondering, was there ever a time when things were consistently good? The answer, gently and honestly, is no. Because history doesn't operate like a peaceful meadow. It's more like a sea. Calm at times, yes, but always capable of turning. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It swallows. Even during the so-called Golden Ages, when emperors built baths and philosophers debated truth in marble halls. Someone somewhere was starving in a ditch. Someone was praying for rain, or dreading a birth that might not end in life. Let's go back to the Neolithic era around 7000 BC. You might imagine this as a simpler time, and in some ways it was. No empires, no tax collectors, no plagues sailing in on merchant ships. But it wasn't easy. These were the first farming communities. People who had only recently traded their nomadic, hunter-gatherer lives for small clearings of wheat and barley. They built huts, stored grain, domesticated animals, and in doing so, invited a whole new range of problems. Imagine a young man named Ral, in the highlands of what is now Turkey. He wakes to the sound of coughing, his sister again. The straw in the roof is soaked. Mice have found their way into the food stores. He puts on a tunic made of rough flax and steps outside. The sky is heavy. There's a sharpness in the wind. His father is already bent over the field, checking the sprouting shoots. Ral joins him, but in the silence they both feel it. Something's wrong. The seeds aren't taking. The earth smells sour. Could be rot. Could be something worse. Farming is a gamble. And back then, it wasn't the safe bet we imagine. One bad harvest didn't just mean less bread. It meant sickness, weakness, death. In fact, archaeological studies of early farming communities show something peculiar. After the agricultural revolution, human health got worse. Why? Because diets became less varied. People started living in tighter quarters. Diseases spread faster. Malnutrition set in. Skeletons from Neolithic sites show shorter stature, more tooth decay, and signs of anemia. And once you built a village, you were stuck with it. No more wandering to richer lands. You belong to the soil. Relax. You're not in a hut. You're not chewing grain boiled in mud water. But they were. And yet, even here in the earliest settlements, we find signs of culture. Figurines, cave paintings, early altars. Proof that even in the hardest lives, humans needed to believe in something more. They sang. They sculpted. They remembered their dead. One small clay figure from Catalhoyuk, an ancient town in Anatolia, shows a plump woman seated on a throne, flanked by leopards. Scholars think she might have been a goddess of fertility. Whether she was or not, one thing is clear. Even 9,000 years ago, people wanted to celebrate life. Despite everything. Let's look at another moment, one of the worst for urban living. The year is 1665. We're in London, and the plague is back. Summer and the air is hot, thick, rancid with rot and sweat. People are dying by the thousands. Every morning, death carts roll through the streets, and a man rings a bell calling, "Bring out your dead." In one house, a mother boards up the windows. Her youngest has a rash. She's praying it's heat, not disease. But the child doesn't wake. By week's end, her husband has the fever too. In another part of the city, a physician in a plague doctor's mask, beaked and eerie, pushes through a crowded lane. He holds a stick to prod the sick. Inside his mask, herbs and vinegar try to filter the air. It doesn't work. Samuel Pepys, a London bureaucrat and diarist, wrote of the time, "Lord, how empty the streets are and how sad people look. I saw two women carrying a child's coffin between them. Not one man would help." This wasn't the Black Death of the 1300s, but it was still horrific. That year, London lost 100,000 people, about a quarter of its population. Let that thought fade into the quiet now. You're not in 1665. The air is still. The room is safe. Let the candlelight in your mind glow a little brighter. Now shift with me once more. It's 1816, Europe, and the sun has disappeared again. This is the year without a summer, triggered by the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia the year before. It was the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history, 10 times more violent than Krakatoa. The ash cloud it created circled the globe, dimming the skies, lowering temperatures, and turning crops to sludge. In New England, it snowed in June. In Germany, there were food riots. In China, floods followed by droughts devastated harvests. One woman wrote in her journal, "We eat nettles and mushrooms, and thank God for both." Another side effect. A group of bored writers vacationing near Lake Geneva, stuck indoors by constant rain, decided to have a ghost story contest. One of them, Mary Shelley, wrote a novel called Frankenstein. Out of darkness, literal and figurative, came creativity. Let's take a moment to stretch back even further, because as far back as we look, hardship waits. Picture Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the cradle of civilization. In 2200 BCE, this region experienced one of the earliest recorded civilizational collapses, likely due to climate change. Rain stopped falling, crops failed, cities were abandoned. A Sumerian tablet reads, "The gods turned the land to dust. The rivers ran dry. The grain did not grow." Poetic, desperate, and remarkably familiar, because that's what ties all these worst times together. It's not just the physical suffering. It's the uncertainty, the fear that the world you know is ending, and you don't know what will take its place. That's as true in Mesopotamia as it was in medieval France, or Aztec Mexico, or famine-era Ireland. And yet, we're still here, because with every collapse, someone picked up a stone and built again. Someone taught a child to sing. Someone painted a story on a wall. So what was the worst time to ever be human? The truth is, there are many contenders. The year 536, the Black Death, the Great Famine, the Mongol invasions, the Holocaust, World War I, the Congo Free State. Any moment of mass suffering, loss, or brutality qualifies. But history isn't a competition of misery. It's a tapestry of endurance. We tell these stories not to wallow in despair, but to honor those who lived through it, who carried us forward. Let your breathing slow now. You've walked through centuries of struggle. You've seen empires rise and fall, heard the cries of famine, the silence of disease, the whisper of snow on ruined crops. And through it all, a single thread, human resilience. Now the candle flickers low. The fire is ash. But you are here. And in your quiet, you carry the memory of everyone who came before. Sleep well. You've earned the rest. Chapter 2. A day in the life of a medieval nobody. The fire is low. Somewhere outside, a dog barks. Distant, hoarse, uninterested. The wind rustles dry thatch and the occasional cough echoes through thin wooden walls. Tonight, we leave behind empires and disasters. Tonight, we slip quietly into a single life. A quiet one, a short one, the kind that never made it into any book. This is not a knight's tale, not a king's rise, no grand crusades, no glorious duels. This is just life. It's sometime in the mid-14th century, in the Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of lords, villages, forests, and forgotten saints. You are not important. Not to the world, at least. You are Clara, age 22. You've already had 3 children, one of whom still lives. You haven't seen a mirror in months. There are lice in your blanket, but that's normal. Everyone itches. Your day begins before the sun. It has to, because light is precious and short, and your body's too cold to sleep any longer. You rise, dress in wool that's never been washed properly, and check the bread. It's stale, a little moldy, but not deadly. It'll have to do. The air inside your cottage smells like smoke, goat, and boiled cabbage from yesterday. Your husband, Otto, is outside already, checking if the cow survived the frost. You hear him curse softly. The answer is probably no. This is how most people lived in the Middle Ages. Not in castles, but in small huts with dirt floors and no chimneys. Smoke simply drifted upward and hung in the rafters until it soaked into your hair, your skin, your lungs. You don't bathe today. You bathed 2 weeks ago, and that was enough. Your clothes itch, but you're used to it. You keep your head covered, partly from custom, partly from shame, and partly because your hair is a tangled mat from years of winter wind and summer sweat. Outside, the village is stirring. A dog limps past. Children run barefoot in mud and frost. They have the thick, red cheeks of the half-fed. There are no toys, just sticks, stones, and the occasional beetle. You nod to the priest's boy. He nods back, then spits. Here are a few facts about your world. You don't know what year it is. You don't know what country you're in. You can't read. You've never traveled more than 8 miles from where you were born. You think the world ends at the forest. And you're almost certainly wrong about everything you believe. The church says the earth is the center of everything. That's fine. You've never questioned it. You don't have the time to question anything. When your hands are raw from scrubbing, when your child has worms, when your only candle has melted to a nub, you don't argue with the heavens. You just whisper to them. Around noon, you break the soil behind the cottage. The garden is dying early this year. Too much frost, too little sun. You dig for turnips. Your fingers turn gray. A neighbor's pig squeals nearby. Someone is chasing it with a stick. A traveling friar once told your village the world was ending soon. That was 3 years ago. Still feels like it might be true. Every year brings new rumors. The French king is dying. The English have a new weapon. The Hungarians have witches. But none of it matters to you. You're still trying to boil the last of the barley. Relax now. Let the fog of that world settle over your thoughts. This isn't misery for drama's sake. It's not tragedy for show. It's just history. A soft, patient reminder that most lives were quiet, cold, brief, and still worth remembering. Let's return to Clara. This afternoon, her son, Mathis, coughs blood into a rag. He's 4 years old. Probably won't see 5. She's seen it before, in other children, in her cousin last spring, in the merchant's boy who disappeared after the black sores bloomed on his neck. No one speaks of the plague now, not because it's gone, but because it's always around. It moves in the air, in fleas, in the breath of strangers. You make a poultice with herbs and hot wine. You whisper a prayer. You sleep beside him, knowing it might be the last time you do. That night, the priest knocks on your door. He's drunk, but gentle. He asks if you've been to confession. He smells like onions and sweat and incense. You lie and say yes. He nods, then leaves. Now take a moment. Not every day in the medieval world was a horror. There were weddings, feasts, laughter. The first time someone brewed beer just right. The first snowfall, soft and silent. Before the hunger set in. People told stories, danced badly, played music with bones and twine. You can almost hear it. Can't you? The pluck of a string. The slow clap. The rhythm of wooden shoes on clay floors. And love. Always love. There were glances across fields. Notes passed with bread. Kisses behind the chapel. Hearts pounding like battle drums. Even in Clara's world, there was room for that. One night, after Mathis recovers, or seems to, you lie awake, staring at the beams of your roof. You remember a song your grandmother sang. You hum it. Something about a green hill, a white flower, a black bird. You never learned the words. You don't need to. The melody is enough. Tomorrow you'll fetch water. You'll milk what's left of the goat. You'll patch Otto's shirt. And maybe, just maybe, you'll catch sight of a heron rising from the river mist and think, this is what it means to live. That's the thing about medieval life. It wasn't all blood and mud. It was moments small and stubborn. A loaf rising in a clay oven. A child's first word. A warm bowl on a cold night. So was it the worst time to be human? In many ways, yes. Life expectancy was low, around 30 to 35 years, mostly due to infant mortality. Toothaches could kill. Childbirth was lethal. Doctors bled you when you had a fever. If you displeased the wrong man, you could be whipped, hanged, or burned, no questions asked. The word comfort didn't mean pillows. It meant survival. Baths were rare. Shoes were for church. Rats were everywhere. And God watched your every move. And yet, they survived. Not because life was easy, but because it was theirs. Let your body grow heavier now. Let the weight of centuries press gently around you. You've walked beside Clara, seen her day, felt her fear and her strength. And you've remembered something important, that every ordinary life contains something extraordinary, not in glory, not in triumph, but in endurance. And tomorrow, we'll walk with someone else, in another terrible century. But for now, rest. The candles are low. The world is quiet, and you're no longer alone in the dark. The rooster doesn't crow this morning. It froze overnight. But Clara wakes anyway, as she always does, with the light. Not because the sun breaks the horizon, but because her body has learned to rise just before the cold reaches her toes. She sits up slowly. The ache in her back is worse than yesterday. Her fingers, bent from years of scrubbing and weaving, no longer straighten fully. But there's bread to knead and water to fetch. And Otto hasn't sharpened the scythe yet. Her child is still breathing. That's enough to start the day. In her small village, 10 huts and a chapel, there is no written history. No ink, no parchment. But the people remember. They remember the hard frost of 46, when the goats died on their feet. They remember the summer lightning fire that took old Marta and her chimney. They remember who ran, who stayed, who stole, and who gave bread. Memory is currency here. You earn it with decency or cowardice, and it lasts longer than any coin. Today, Clara walks to the edge of the woods. She's heard the wolves again. She doesn't plan to go far, just far enough to find kindling and maybe a few herbs for Mathis. She brings a small sack and a dull knife. The knife once belonged to her brother. He drowned 3 years ago. The woods are quiet, but not peaceful. Every snapped twig sounds too sharp. Every breeze feels like a warning. But she's not afraid. Fear is a luxury. She doesn't have room for it. While Clara gathers nettle and pine twigs, let's step back. Let's talk about what she'll never know. She'll never know the term feudal system. She lives it but doesn't name it. She knows only that a man called a lord collects grain, and that a man called a reeve counts it. She knows that she must offer part of everything she grows, even the wild mushrooms, even the duck eggs she found last spring. In return, her village is protected. In theory. But when raiders last came through, the lord was nowhere in sight. The villagers stood alone with pitchforks and boiling tar. Let's take a small tour of Clara's world. The village green is a patch of dirt, more brown than green. Children run barefoot, smacking each other with sticks and laughing in the strange, howling way children do when they haven't eaten enough. The well is low. Someone tied a charm of feathers and ash near the top, for good luck or protection or just out of habit. The chapel leans slightly to the left. Inside, a wooden carving of the Virgin watches with a faint, forgiving smile. A goat once got in and chewed off the left foot. The blacksmith's hut smells of scorched hair. He lost his thumb in a tool accident and drinks vinegar water to keep the ghosts out. The priest walks with a limp and has lost half his teeth. He believes in hell more than heaven. And everyone believes in sin. Sin is everywhere. In bad crops, in sick infants, in lightning strikes and spoiled cheese. You confess weekly, not because you feel guilty, but because you're terrified of what might happen if you don't. But let's return to Clara. She finds a squirrel's skull in the woods. It's smooth and white. She places it carefully in her satchel. Not as food, but for Mathis. He likes strange shapes. She finds a patch of wild garlic and pulls it up with numb fingers. Then she hears hooves. Not fast, not many, just one rider. She freezes behind a tree and watches. A cloaked figure, dusty boots, no banner, passes slowly. His horse limps slightly. She doesn't breathe, doesn't move. He doesn't see her. When he's gone, she waits longer than necessary, just to be sure. Then she hurries back, clutching the garlic like treasure. Let's pause. Take a breath. Feel the firelight again. Let the fear drain from your bones. This isn't your life, but it was hers, and thousands more like it. By evening, Clara is back in the cottage. She boils the garlic with a scrap of barley and rainwater. It tastes like nothing, but Mathis eats 3 spoonfuls before falling asleep. Otto returns late, carrying a sack of moss and a half-rotted onion. He looks at her, says nothing, and starts sharpening the scythe. Later, they sit beside each other in silence. She reaches over and takes his hand. It's rough, cold, but warm enough to hold. There's a saying from a 14th century English peasant poem. Bread and ale, and if I'm lucky, pottage pail. That was the dream. Not cake, not meat, just bread, ale, and a bowl of warm mush. Because when your world was full of sickness, sin, war, and famine, a full belly was glory. Let's step into the heart of their fears. The church. Not because it was evil, but because it was everywhere. The church told you what to eat, what to wear, when to kneel, and when to die. It blessed your birth. It recorded your marriage. It rang the bell for your burial. And if you strayed too far, if you doubted or disobeyed, it promised eternal fire. It wasn't just religion. It was law, government, school, newspaper, theater. But not everyone obeyed. Some whispered old words in the woods. Some left bread for forest spirits. Some carved strange symbols into doorways. And some just wondered. They wondered if maybe the stars meant something else. If maybe the priest didn't know everything. But mostly they stayed quiet. Because asking the wrong question could get you drowned, burned, or worse, forgotten. That's what scared them most. Not hell, but being erased. No grave, no name, no story. But tonight we remember them. We speak Clara's name. We watch her day. We lift her from silence and wrap her story in warmth. Back in the hut, Mathis sleeps. Otto is already snoring. Clara watches the coals in the hearth. They flicker, crackle, dim. She smiles, not because life is good, but because it's hers. And so we leave her for now. The worst time to be human? Perhaps. But even then, there was garlic soup, a squirrel skull, a whispered song, a hand held by firelight. Let your eyelids close. Let Clara's world drift back into the quiet. More stories await. But for now, sleep. The rooster doesn't return. It's gone now, same as the piglet and the last of the apples. But life in Clara's village doesn't stop. It never does. Another week, another worry. This morning, it's the reeve, the man who collects for the Lord. He arrives with his leather satchel and tired eyes, trudging into the center of the village square with the kind of heavy presence that sets teeth on edge. He doesn't knock. He doesn't shout. He just waits. And the villagers slowly gather. Clara stands near the back, clutching her sack of barley. It's not much, but it's all they have. If she gives more, Mathis will go hungry. If she gives less, the reeve will report her. No one talks much when he's there. They just place their tribute at his feet and avoid his gaze. You might think a reeve had power, but even he is a pawn. Behind him looms the bailiff, and behind the bailiff, the baron, and behind the baron, the bishop, and beyond that, a God who sees all, forgives little, and never seems in much of a hurry. Power in this world isn't just about wealth. It's about distance. The farther you are from the mud, the more untouchable you become. And Clara? Clara is ankle deep in it. Still, she gives her barley. The reeve nods without warmth. She turns back home, heart pounding, praying that this small offering buys her a few more weeks of peace. The medieval world had its rhythms. Monday was for washing, Tuesday for spinning, Wednesday for baking, Thursday for brewing. If you were lucky, Friday meant fish, Saturday meant mending, and Sunday meant rest, or at least the appearance of it. But rest was a rare privilege. For women like Clara, it never really came. Her body carried everything: children, water, baskets of flax, fear. Her back bent under 100 nameless tasks. She wove, cooked, swept, patched, picked lice, smoothed fevered foreheads, buried small bodies, lit candles, and never once asked, "Why me?" Because the answer would have been, because someone has to. And she wasn't alone. There was Agnes, the midwife, who smelled of garlic and goat milk and could stop a bleeding birth with just a cloth and a prayer. There was Hilda, whose laugh scared off crows and who kept a secret still for dying dogs. There was Magda, the girl with the crooked arm who carved saints out of bone and left them at graves. No one asked her to, but no one stopped her either. These women held the village together, not with laws or swords, but with the quiet, endless labor of survival. Tonight, Clara can't sleep. Otto snores beside her. Mathis murmurs in dreams. But something is wrong. A feeling, a tension in the air. She rises, wraps a shawl around her shoulders, and steps outside. The village is dark, save for one flickering lantern by the priest's door. She walks, silent as a ghost, through the lanes. The air smells of wet wood and smoke. At the edge of the green, she sees it. A stranger, sitting beside the well. Thin, hooded, hands trembling around a leather flask. Clara freezes. Her heart skips. Travelers are rare. Strangers even rarer. They bring news. They bring lice. They bring stories. They bring danger. The man sees her. "Water," he croaks. She doesn't move. "Please, let's pause here, because you need to understand how serious this is." In the medieval world, a stranger could be a thief, A murderer, a plague carrier, a spy, or worse, a heretic. But he could also be a pilgrim, a lost son, a man with one last story to tell before death. Clara takes a step forward, then another. She says nothing, just walks to the well, draws water, and offers the wooden cup. The man drinks with both hands, as if it's the first water he's had in days. He looks up, eyes shining. "You're kind," he says. Clara doesn't answer. She's already walking away. The next morning, the man is gone. So is the cup. So is a small sack of oats she left by the well. Otto never asks. He doesn't need to. He knows his wife. Life continues. Not in leaps, but in drips. Time measured not in months, but in how many loaves the flour can stretch. In how many fires the woodpile can feed. In how many nights the cough stays dry. But something has changed in Clara. A flicker of the world beyond her valley. She finds herself humming that song again. The one from her grandmother. Green hill, white flower, black bird. She sings it to Mathis while weaving, and for the first time in weeks he smiles. Let's step outside the village now. Just for a moment. Let's walk the rutted road that leads to the next parish, 5 miles away. Along the way, there's a tree that was once used for hangings. The rope marks are still there. No one talks about it, but everyone walks faster when they pass. Farther on, the road crosses a stream. In spring, it swells to flood. In winter, it freezes solid. In fall, it runs low and sour. Every year, someone drowns in it. Last year, it was a child named Ansel. His mother still walks with her eyes to the dirt. Beyond the stream is the next village. They say their priest drinks. They say their midwife's blind. They say their grain always spoils. But they say a lot of things. This is the world Clara will never see. 5 miles might as well be 5 kingdoms. The sky turns colder now. Autumn arrives not with fanfare, but with aching bones and early sunsets. Clara gathers what she can, nuts, roots, dried herbs. Otto butchers the old goat. It's not much, but the fat will help stretch the winter. She makes candles from tallow. She knots garlic over the doorway. She teaches Mathis how to pray. Not because she believes the words will save them, but because rhythm matters. Ritual matters. It gives shape to fear. In the coldest night of October, Clara wakes to a sound. Scratching. From under the floorboards. She doesn't scream. She listens. It's rats. It's always rats. She lights a stub of candle, watches the shadows flicker, and whispers a name. Not a saint. Not a king. Her mother's name. Just once. Then she sleeps again. This is not the story of a queen, or a witch, or a legend. It is the story of a mother, a wife, a woman who boiled garlic in rainwater, sang to her son, gave a stranger a cup, and whispered her mother's name into the cold. Was this the worst time to be human? Asked Clara. She might say yes, or she might say nothing. She might just smile and tuck the blanket around her boy and light another candle. Because sometimes survival is the story, and sometimes the smallest lives leave the quietest echoes. Let your breath soften now. Let Clara rest. We'll leave her there, by the hearth, eyes closed, mouth half open in sleep. Her story is simple, but never small, and we carry it forward. Morning breaks in a smear of pale gray light. It is not the kind of dawn that inspires poetry. It is the kind of dawn that means work. And for Clara, as with every day before and every day that will follow, there is always more work. Today, the harvest must begin. Not the golden celebration of songs and scythes you might picture. No, this is the late harvest scramble. The desperate gathering of what's left after rot, storm, and birds have taken their share. It's wet, muddy, and quiet. Only the crows seem to be enjoying themselves. Otto shoulders the worn scythe. Clara drags the basket. Mathis stays behind, bundled in wool too rough for his thin skin. He stares at the fire, quiet, watching. The fields are stiff with frost. Each stalk of rye crackles when bent. The earth clings to boots like glue. You don't walk, you trudge. There's no music, no laughter, just breath and motion. Clara and Otto don't speak. They don't need to. Their rhythm is set. like church bells or coughing at dusk. Bent knees. Grab the stalk. Slice. Drop. Over and over and over. By mid-morning, Clara's back is a knot of pain. Her hands are red with cold. Her knees ache like stone. But she doesn't stop. Not today. Because winter isn't coming. It's already here. And if the last sacks of grain aren't filled by week's end, their child might not see spring. Let's take a moment to count Clara's world. Not in hours, but in calories. 1 serving of barley pottage, 200 calories. A slice of black bread, 150. If she's lucky, a bit of goat cheese, 100. That's her day. And she burns thousands. Just working. Just surviving. This is the invisible cost of medieval life. Not just hunger, but exhaustion. A body always at the edge of collapse. A heart always one skipped meal from stillness. At midday, Otto calls for a break. They share half a dried onion and a strip of smoked fat. Tastes like salt and dust. Clara chews slowly, eyes on the horizon. She remembers once, when she was small, being given an apple. A real one. Red, crisp, sweet as memory. She thinks about it often. Not because of the taste, but because of the surprise of it. Nothing surprises her anymore. They work until the light goes. Then longer. When the sun sinks, the wind rises. They pull their cloaks tighter, drag the baskets toward the cottage. A full day and barely enough to fill a sack. But it's something. There's always something. Inside, Mathis sleeps. The fire's gone low. Clara kneels and feeds it dried roots and pine shavings. She stirs what's left of last night's stew and adds a handful of foraged nettle. Otto says little, just eats, then stretches out on the bench, head resting on bundled straw. Clara watches the firelight flicker on the walls. Another day survived. Another piece of herself spent. She hums that old tune again, the one she doesn't know the words to, and she thinks, not of tomorrow, but of 10 winters ago, when her mother sang it to her in a cottage just like this, where the fire smoked the same way, where the floor creaked in the same spots, where the same world tried to grind them down and somehow didn't. Let's look at Clara's world from a wider angle, because while she labors in frost and silence, Europe is changing. Somewhere, a scholar in Paris is copying Aristotle. Somewhere, a lord is building a stone keep. Somewhere, a merchant's son is dreaming of trade with the East. But none of it touches Clara. She doesn't know about Florence, or spices, or printing presses. Her world is smaller than your bedroom, and more dangerous than any battlefield. But it's hers, and that's the key, isn't it? You don't need to know you're in history to be history. You don't need to hold a sword to be brave. You don't need to write a book to be remembered. You just need to live, to love, to leave something behind, even if it's just a song, hummed by firelight, that your child carries forward. In the last days of autumn, the frost deepens. The well ices at the edges. Smoke hangs low over the village, caught in the throat of winter. Mathis falls ill again. A cough, hot skin, sunken eyes. Clara does what she can. Onion syrup, cloth soaked in wine. She whispers prayers in Latin she doesn't understand. And one night, when the fever is worst, she does something rare. She weeps, quietly, not for show, just a slow unraveling of held-in hope. Otto takes her hand, says nothing, squeezes once. They both know, this is life. This is what it means to be alive, here, now. The next morning, Mathis stirs. The fever breaks. Not forever, but for now. And that's enough. We'll end Clara's story here. Not with a death, not with a miracle, but with a bowl of warm broth and the soft sound of breathing in the dark. Her life is not a tragedy. It's not a triumph either. It's just real. And that's what makes it beautiful. So was this the worst time to be human? Possibly. But even then, there were lullabies. There were hands held. There were stories whispered in the dark. And there was life, raw, messy, and fiercely held. Let the weight of this history settle around you. Let your breath fall into rhythm with Clara's. Let your heart beat slow and steady with the echo of hers. Because tonight you've walked beside her. And that memory, quiet, unrecorded, anonymous, will now live on in you. Sleep well, traveler. We'll rise again soon. Chapter 3. The year the sky went dark, 536 CE, and the collapse of the ancient world. The fire crackles low again. This time, there's a strange stillness outside. Not just silence, but a kind of waiting. The kind that settles into the bones of a world about to change. Tonight, we journey back nearly 1500 years. To a moment so strange, so devastating, that the air itself betrayed the living. The year was 536 CE, and the sky forgot how to shine. Let's set the scene. You're in Constantinople, capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. You wake just before dawn, as always, but something is wrong. The light outside your shuttered window is gray. Not foggy, not cloudy, just dim, like the world's been smudged. You step outside, look up, and the sun is there, but sickly, blurred behind a thick haze. It gives no heat, no gold, just a dull, lifeless circle in the sky. It's not just your city, it's the whole world. The sun doesn't shine. For months, the Byzantine historian Procopius wrote, "During this year, a most dread portent took place. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. And in Ireland, monks quietly scratched into their annals. A failure of bread in the year 536. China, snow in summer, crops withered in the fields. Peru, drought. Mesopotamia, floods. Something had happened, something big, and the earth, without warning, shifted into silence and cold. What caused it? Today, scientists believe it was a volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, or Indonesia, maybe even both, just years apart. Whatever it was, it launched enough ash into the upper atmosphere to veil the sun. For 18 months, it was twilight all day. Temperatures dropped. Famine spread. One Treering study in Europe shows the coldest decade in over 2,000 years began right here. Let's live a day in it. You're a shepherd in the Alps. Your name is Eland. You have a wife, 2 sons, and a tiny patch of barley you tend with frozen fingers. Every day is colder than the last. The grain won't grow. The goat gives less milk. The air smells like wet stone and dust. Your wife stops singing. Your sons stop laughing. Each evening, you light a fire not for warmth, but to chase the dark. And still, it comes. You begin burning everything. Furniture, old boots, door hinges, just to stay alive. And one night, your neighbor's family disappears. Gone. Without a sound. You don't ask where. Because the next morning, you find a stew pot still warm outside your door. And you eat. In Rome, the streets are emptier. Trade slows. Even the churches grow quiet. People mutter that God is punishing them. In Mesoamerica, the Maya struggle with drought. Farmers watch their maize fail again and again. In China, records from the Northern Wei dynasty describe, yellow dust rained like fog, crops withered, people perished. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a plague. It was the world itself closing its hand. Now imagine being a child then. You don't remember what warmth feels like. You don't remember blue skies. Your drawings are all gray. Your parents whisper when they think you're asleep. You hear stories of a time before this, when the sun was hot, when the rivers ran clear, when pears were sweet. But you don't believe them, because to you the sky has always looked like ash. Even great leaders weren't spared. Justinian I, Emperor of Byzantium, was halfway through his attempt to rebuild the glory of Rome. Palaces, laws, armies, he had grand plans. And then the darkness came, then famine, and then, just as the haze began to lift, plague. The plague of Justinian, arriving in 541 CE, likely carried by fleas on rats aboard Egyptian grain ships, exploded across the empire. One chronicler claimed 5,000, 10,000, even 16,000 deaths per day in the city. At its height, bodies were stacked in towers. Priests gave up burying them. The living walked streets that stank of rot and silence. Justinian himself fell ill. He survived. Most didn't. Let your breath soften here. Let that weight pass through you. The world didn't end in 536 CE. but it almost paused. That's what made it the worst year in recorded history, according to many scholars. Not because of war, but because of the sheer emptiness it left behind. Crops failed across continents. Cities shrank. Languages were lost. Tombs went unsealed. The global population may have dropped by a third. Imagine a silence that wide. And still people endured. We have records from monks, scribes, potters, weavers, priests, shepherds, and queens. They left behind letters, carvings, broken tools, and lullabies. Signs not just of suffering, but of living. Even when the sun forgot to shine, people told stories. Even when their world froze, they warmed their children. Even when no one came to save them, they saved each other. Let's visit one more person before we rest. Her name is Yijuan. She lives in a village near Luoyang, in northern China. She's 12, and she's hungry. Every day, her mother sends her to the river for water. Every night, they boil leaves and chew rice husks. Her brother died in spring. Her father went north and didn't return. But her mother still sings. It's a soft song, an old one, about lanterns and red silk and the laughter of plum blossoms. Yijuan doesn't remember plum blossoms, but she believes her mother, believes they'll come back someday, and she's right. By 547, the skies began to clear. Slowly, the sun returned. Fields warmed. Fruit came back to the trees. Children began to laugh again. The decade was still hard, but the worst had passed. So, was 536 CE the worst time to be alive? Maybe, but even then, even in that long twilight, people held on. They lit fires. They whispered prayers. They hugged their children close. And that was enough. Let your thoughts drift now. Let the cold sky fade. Let the fire warm your fingers. Let Yijuan's song carry you. It has traveled far, and it remembers you. As the darkness clung to the world, not all turned inward. Some sought explanations, signs, omens, reasons to make sense of a sun that would not rise, a sky that gave no warmth, and a planet that suddenly felt like it had turned its back on life. And they did what humans always do when the world breaks. They looked to the gods. In the Byzantine Empire, churches filled. Icons were kissed with trembling lips. Processions wound through the streets, people barefoot and weeping, holding candles aloft in the dim gray light. But in the north, where the forests were deeper, the roads rougher, and Christianity hadn't yet fully taken root, other explanations took hold. In the Scandinavian world, something stirred in the old myths. It was during this very time that stories of Ragnarok, the end of the world, began to crystallize. And perhaps not by coincidence. After all, what could better explain an eternal twilight, a dying sun, and frozen fields than the notion that a wolf had eaten the sky? That was Skoll in Norse mythology, the sky-chasing beast destined to devour the sun. And in 536, that didn't seem like poetry. It seemed like fact. Meanwhile, far from the snow and shadow of northern Europe, other empires were buckling. The once mighty Sasanian Empire of Persia, Rome's great rival, was beginning to falter. Grain shortages led to unrest. Military campaigns slowed. And as trade routes suffered from chaos and plague, the economic engine of the empire stuttered. In South Asia, inscriptions grow sparse. Kingdoms changed hands rapidly. Temples stopped recording donations. And in Mesoamerica, archaeological evidence points to sudden disruptions. Abandoned fields, collapsed irrigation, shortened building periods. Even without a single global language, the message was clear. Something had gone deeply wrong with the world. Let's walk now to a ruined villa. It lies on the edge of the Mediterranean, overlooking a coast once vibrant with trade. This was once the home of a minor Roman noble. His family fled when the stores ran out. The mosaic floors are cracked now, the fountain dry, weeds push through marble, and on the wall, in a corner of what was once a child's room, someone has scratched a figure into the plaster. A little stick man, arms raised toward a circle in the sky, crossed out with lines. Was it a child's drawing of the sun vanishing? Or a mother, mourning the last warmth her child would ever feel? We don't know, but it's there, Still. Now pause. Take a breath. Stretch your hands if you like. Let the ancient cold fade. Because the worst times in history are not meant to frighten. They're meant to remind us how many survived. Not kings, not warriors, but weavers, fishers, scribes, children, mothers, the people who held the world together not through power but through presence. There's a name we almost forgot, Gildas, a 6th century British monk, writing in what is now Wales, around the time of 536. He did not record the dimmed skies, but his tone is unmistakably grim. He called his era an age of ruin and confusion. His words are soaked in loss, of culture, of clarity, of faith. And yet he wrote, he recorded, he remembered. What about the Far East? In Korea, the three kingdoms were locked in struggle. In Japan, the Yamato court began compiling its first records. In China, the fall of the Northern Wei dynasty led to chaos and new regional powers. Even where the sun still rose weakly over the mountains, the structures of empire cracked. It wasn't always fire and famine. Sometimes it was simply the collapse of order, the silence of stopped scribes, the empty shelf where grain should have been. The prayer never answered, but the human spirit, it doesn't fade so easily. Somewhere in Ethiopia, in the Aksumite Empire, traders still crossed deserts. In India, even amidst upheaval, a sculptor carved a sleeping Vishnu into stone. In the islands of Southeast Asia, sailors still launched canoes into storm-gray seas. Because not even the darkest year can kill every light. We return now to a village in Gaul. A boy named Remy has just turned 12. His father is dead. His mother is blind in one eye. He's taken to carrying a torch through the woods to scare off wolves. Tonight, he walks to the river. Is half frozen. The moon is a pale ghost. He kneels by the bank, cuts a sliver of bark, and begins to carve. There's nothing fancy, just a figure. Arms open, a circle over its head. His mother once said it was a sun prayer. He doesn't know what that means, but he makes it anyway. That's what happened all over the world. Tiny acts of meaning, scratched into wood, whispered in the dark, passed from hand to hand like the last ember in a dying fire. These were the true acts of resistance. Not battles, not banners, but memory. By the time the skies began to clear, gradually, uncertainly, humanity had changed. Populations were lower. Some cities never recovered. Languages died. Trade slowed. Faith twisted. But the survivors? They adapted, rebuilt, rewrote. They planted new fields. They started new stories. And soon another era would rise, one marked by religion, migration, innovation, and, eventually, light. So what, in the end, do we make of 536? It was not a single year. It was a season of suffering, of gray skies and broken grain and cold nights that lasted too long. But it was also a mirror, a test, and humanity passed, not with glory, but with grit. Let your body rest. Let your thoughts loosen. You've seen the year the sky forgot to shine. You've felt the hush of the long dark. You've walked beside the ones who kept walking. Now close your eyes if you haven't already. The sun will rise again, and in the morning so will you. The smoke rising from hearth fires that year carried more than heat, carried sorrow. It clung to rooftops, soaked into cloaks, drifted across villages and towns that no longer laughed, no longer sang. Even the animals seemed quieter in 536. Chickens laid fewer eggs. Dogs howled in the evenings. Herds wandered restlessly. The sun did not warm their coats. The wind felt wrong. People looked to the trees and saw too many bare branches, to the fields and saw too little green, to the sky and saw a ghost of what used to be there. And in that ghostly silence, a truth settled in. Nature was not only mother, could also be executioner. In Egypt, grain once flowed like gold down the Nile. But now, with the skies veiled and the floods inconsistent, harvests faltered. Egyptians, so used to abundance, found their storerooms light. Priests offered sacrifices. Astrologers blamed stars. But no prediction brought food. From Byzantine sources we learn of grain riots. bread lines, fistfights in Alexandria between men who once drank wine under palm trees. Even the land of pyramids, steady for millennia, bent its knees to the sky. Across the Mediterranean, cities like Antioch, once bustling trade hubs, saw the flicker of lamps instead of torches. Markets thinned, coin lost value, ships stopped coming. In marketplaces, old women clutched onions like treasure. Fishmongers guarded rotten catch with knives. Children who once ran barefoot through alleys now huddled indoors, noses red, breath thin, asking questions no one could answer. Let's walk for a while with a man named Anatolios, a cobbler from Thessaloniki. He once made sandals for soldiers, boots for clergy, slippers for brides. Now he fixes broken saws for boiled cabbage. Once someone gave him a song in exchange for stitches. He still hums it. One evening, after patching a pair of shoes for a merchant's wife, she offers him a thin smile and whispers, "Do you think the sun is angry?" He doesn't answer, because if it is, what then? Somewhere in Armenia, a boy learns to read by candlelight. Somewhere in Nubia, a king watches his people flee dry land. Somewhere in Gaul, a woman buries her fourth child beneath frozen soil. And somewhere in Ethiopia, a girl named Hannah learns to pray not for rain, but for morning. Just morning. A real one. With birdsong. With warmth. The most terrifying thing about 536 wasn't just the famine. It wasn't the cold. It was the lack of cause. No one knew what had happened. There was no announcement. No divine decree. No foreign invader. Just sky turned gray. Just the cold that stayed. Just the crops that refused. The not knowing. That was the cruelest cut. And then came 541. The world was still recovering slowly, awkwardly, from the deep freeze. Some crops were returning. Children were growing again. And then the plague. Carried along the Mediterranean on merchant ships from Egypt, it crept into harbors like a shadow. The plague of Justinian was swift, merciless, and for most, fatal. At its peak, Constantinople lost 40% of its population in just a few months. A Byzantine court official wrote, "They died faster than we could count. The carts broke under their weight. Priests refused to enter homes. Families stacked corpses like firewood. Wells were poisoned by rot. Streets became rivers of disease. And Justinian, emperor of the East, himself caught the plague. He survived. But his empire did not really. Not in the way it once was. The dream of Rome reborn died in the same year as a million others." Now pause. Let that settle in. From 536 to 546, the world experienced one of its most sustained periods of human suffering. Climate collapse, famine, disease, political chaos, spiritual doubt. And yet, the thread never broke. Let's talk about writing, because even as the world dimmed, people recorded. They scratched dates into wax, carved glyphs into temple stone, painted fragments of lives onto cave walls, copied manuscripts by candlelight with ink they made from soot and spit. They told stories about what came before to remember, and they made up stories about what might come after to hope. It's one of the most beautiful things about our species. When faced with death, we don't just panic. We create meaning. One poem survives from this time, fragmented, likely written in Syria. The sky wears ash like a shroud. The fig tree is silent, but my child sings still. Let God hear him. Simple, grieving, but also resistant. By 550, the world began to change again. The skies cleared more often than not. Trade trickled back. Populations, though diminished, began to rise. There was no fanfare, no great celebration. Just one morning, the sun felt warm again, and someone somewhere smiled without knowing why. Let's visit one last home before this chapter ends. In the hills of Anatolia, a family of 4 sits by a clay oven. The father is old. His hands tremble. The mother is weaving. A girl stirs lentils, and a boy, barefoot, snot-nosed, draws shapes in the dust with a stick. The father looks out the window, eyes narrowed. The light on the grass is soft, yellow, and for the first time in a decade, he says, The son is back. His wife pauses. The spoon stops moving. Even the girl looks up. And for one long, quiet breath, the room is full of something that hasn't visited in years. Hope. Let your body soften. You've walked through ice, through famine, through plague and ash. You've stood under a sky that forgot how to glow. And you've made it through, just like they did. Sleep now. We'll rise again soon. The year 536 became a scar one not just felt, but remembered. And yet, history does not pause forever. Even after the sky dimmed, even after cities thinned and fields turned silent, people kept going. Slowly, haltingly, in pain. But forward, let's rejoin a traveler. His name is Phelan. He's a monk from the edge of what is now Western Ireland. His robes are damp with sea wind. His fingers cracked from cold ink and thinner parchment. Every morning he wakes in a stone cell, eats a piece of oatcake, and walks barefoot to a chapel. There, with the gray light filtering through narrow windows, he copies manuscripts. Why? Because books burn. Stories vanish. But if even one copy survives, if even one voice endures, then the future has not been lost. And so, by candle and silence, he preserves wisdom from a world fading behind him. Across the sea in Mesopotamia, farmers dig deeper wells. The old ones dried during the cold years. And when they failed, people didn't pray, they started over. They built new canals, new terraces. They didn't wait for the gods. They adapted. That's the other miracle of humanity. Not just memory, but reinvention. When the sky goes dark, we learn to make our own light. Even in the great cities, innovation began to stir again. In Alexandria, students returned to study in slowly reopening halls. In Athens, philosophers gathered under trees that had lost too many leaves. And in Rome, now just a shell of its ancient glory, someone scratched the following into a brick wall. Here we remain, still breathing, still Roman. Graffiti, sure, but also scripture in its own way. Let's look at the numbers. Between 536 and 550 CE, global temperatures dropped by an average of 2.5 degrees Celsius. The plague of Justinian would kill an estimated 25 to 50 million people. In some regions, population levels wouldn't recover for 100 years. Entire villages vanished from maps. Languages died, absorbed or abandoned. And major empires, like Rome's eastern arm, were forced into permanent retreat. It was a great forgetting, but in every forgetting, something new can take root. Let's shift again to Ethiopia, where the kingdom of Aksum was among the most powerful trading nations on earth. They connected the Roman world with India and Arabia. Their ships crossed oceans. Their coins bore crosses and crescents, symbols of both commerce and belief. But even Aksum faltered in the wake of famine. The Red Sea routes narrowed, crops thinned, and eventually power moved south. Yet they left behind monuments carved deep into the rock, churches hidden in mountains, obelisks taller than most trees, signs that they lived, that they mattered. Even when the sky went gray, not everyone left stone behind. Most people in 536 left nothing. No coins, no names, no graves, just footprints in a riverbed, or teeth in a midden pile, or ashes in an abandoned hearth. And yet they were the majority, the ones who tilled and birthed and buried and cooked and wept and waited. We don't know their stories by name, but we know their patterns. And in knowing those, we keep them alive. Let's go back to a little girl. We'll call her Talia. She lives in what is now Turkey. Her father died last winter. Her mother sews robes for a priest. Talia carries the bolts of cloth back and forth between shop and chapel. She sings to herself. She doesn't know Latin. She doesn't know famine statistics. She doesn't know she's living through the worst decade in 1,000 years. She just knows that when the priest blesses her forehead with oil, it feels warm. And when her mother laughs, it feels safe. That's enough. You see, even in the worst of times, people found moments of joy. Small ones. The first ripe fig in 4 seasons. A cat returning home after a long week gone. The smell of pine smoke when someone finally lit the oven again. A stranger handing over a piece of salted fish with no request for payment. Kindness in the cold. That's what kept people going. When historians today call 536 the worst year to be alive, they mean physically. Yes, crops failed. Yes, people starved. Yes, disease tore through communities. But life still happened. And life means weddings, births, laughter, bread rising, if only once every few months. Eyes that still looked up, even when the sky gave no comfort. Let's listen in on a final moment. In a village in what is now modern-day Bulgaria, two brothers sit beside a fire. One is older, the other just barely 12. The younger asks, "Why is the sun so small now?" The elder replies, "Because it's sleeping. Will it wake up? One day, but not if we stare too hard. Let it rest." They sit, then, in silence. Not because they believe it, but because sometimes belief isn't about truth. It's about what keeps your feet moving when the wind is sharp and the grain is gone. And so the world turned. The sun returned. The fields came back. People emerged from huts, temples, cloisters, and caves, and began again. The darkness didn't win. Couldn't. Because the human spirit is not made of fire or frost. It is made of continuance. So sleep now. You've seen the world at its lowest, and you've watched it rise again, not with trumpets, but with footsteps, with breath, with lullabies and loaves and someone whispering, "Let it rest." The worst year passed, and you're still here. Chapter 4. Tulips, Teeth, and Terrors. When luxury, madness, and misery collide. Settle in. Let the hush of the room hold you. Let the firelight dance behind your eyes, and breathe slowly. We've wandered through ice and famine, through centuries where survival was the only art that mattered. But now we drift forward, to a stranger time, a time not of ash and cold, but of velvet and porcelain, of powdered wigs and collapsing sanity, of fortunes made on flowers, and lives lost to fashion. Tonight, we explore an era not defined by war, but by the exquisite absurdity of human excess. From the Dutch tulip mania to the French court's powdered despair. From the stench of rotting teeth behind Versailles golden gates to public executions turned theater. This is the story of the centuries where humanity confused luxury with progress, and where the line between beauty and madness blurred so elegantly, it sparkled. The year is 1636. The place, the Dutch Republic, Amsterdam, to be precise. The streets are bustling with trade. Ships roll into harbor stacked with spices, porcelain, silk. Coffee is trickling into elite circles. Tobacco fills clay pipes. And tulips? Well, tulips are worth more than gold. That's not a metaphor. At the height of tulip mania, a single tulip bulb could fetch the price of a canal house in Amsterdam's finest district. How? Let's unravel it slowly. Tulips came to Europe from the Ottoman Empire, likely by way of traders traveling through the Balkans. In Turkey, they were already a status symbol, exotic, rare, dignified. The Dutch, with their deep love for order and cultivation, saw something else. Commodity, but not just any tulips. The truly prized ones were infected by a particular virus, the mosaic virus, which gave them unpredictable, flame-like streaks of color. These were not ordinary flowers. These were nature's roulette wheel. And once people saw money in petals, the gears of madness began to turn. Imagine this. You're a modest baker in Harlem. You work hard. Your sourdough is chewy, your crust golden. You hear your neighbor has sold a single Semper Augustus bulb for enough money to buy 3 ships. You laugh at first. Then someone offers you a bulb in exchange for a share of your bakery. A few days later, that same bulb resells for double. And suddenly, you're not laughing. You're calculating. Within weeks, you're holding auctions not for tulips themselves, but for futures. Contracts to purchase bulbs that haven't even been dug up yet. The economy floats. Prices rise. Merchants sell their homes for a flower they haven't seen. And then, in February 1637, a bulb goes up for auction in Harlem. No one bids. No one. And just like that, the bloom pops. Overnight, the entire tulip market collapses. Bankruptcy spreads like rot. Credit freezes. Some families lose everything. Homes, trades, inheritances, over plants they never owned. One Dutch historian, writing a generation later, said, "Our madness was not measured in coin, but in color." Poetic way of saying we didn't just lose money, we lost sanity. But this wasn't the only time beauty turned deadly. Travel now gently to 18th century France. The court of Louis XV glitters. Versailles shines. Gilded mirrors reflect powdered wigs and blushing satin. But behind the glamour is decay. Because France, at this moment, is obsessed with appearances. The face must be white. The cheeks, red. The eyes, coal dark. The smile, well, that's a problem. Toothbrushes are rare. Sugar is everywhere. And dentistry? Let's just say, if you smell something sweet at court, it's not perfume, it's rot. One lady-in-waiting wrote in her diary, "The countess smiles no more, for she lost 3 teeth at table and bled into her wine." And then there's lead, specifically white lead, the secret to the perfect powdered face. Ladies and some gents applied it daily. Thick, beautiful, radiant, also toxic. Lead seeps into the skin, causes tremors, madness, death. So the most admired faces at court, they were also the sickest. A popular joke whispered among footmen, "The prettier the cheek, the shorter the life." Let's drift through a ballroom now. Music floats, harpsichord and flute. A man in violet breeches spins a duchess in gold. And yet, their eyes don't meet, because hers are failing from mercury in her eyeliner. And his teeth are gone, rotted out, replaced with horse ivory. They dance in circles, powdered death gliding on waxed floors. And then, just beyond the glow of the chandeliers, is the mob. The people, the poor. They see the gold, smell the perfumes, and they boil with hunger. A century later, they will rise. But for now, they watch and wait. And in the dark streets of Paris, candlemakers, coopers, washerwomen, they whisper. They whisper about the queen, about how much powder she wears, about how much bread costs, about what it means to be beautiful while others starve. Back in England, around the same time, men are drilling holes in their skulls to treat headaches. In Poland, nobles carry fans not for fashion, but to wave away lice. In Austria, opera-goers faint not from emotion, but from the crushing stink of bodies in silk with no soap. Human luxury, it turns out, comes with a cost. And often that cost is paid in blood, or breath, or broken backs. Let's rest in a quieter room now. A widow in Bruges lights a single lamp. Her husband died last spring. He'd invested everything in tulips. She didn't care for flowers. She liked books. Now she spends her evenings translating psalms. Not for money, just for memory. When her hands cramp, she laughs. "Even the Lord would think us mad," she mutters. She's right, but madness, after all, is not always destruction. Sometimes it's how we cope. Humans crave beauty. We build towers to touch clouds. We carve lace into stone. We paint ceilings with gods and wear gowns made of silver thread. But when that craving loses anchor, when beauty becomes a business, a mask, a currency, that's when things fall. Not with fire, but with fashion. Sleep gently now. You've seen fortunes rise on petals. You've watched queens die in rouge. You've smelled rot behind royalty. And still, the candle flickers. The music fades. We go on. The 17th and 18th centuries were a tapestry of contradictions. Beneath elegance, stench. Behind wealth, debt. Inside beauty, poison. And every candlelit hall cast a long, flickering shadow. So let's walk through those shadows a little longer. To London, 1720. The city hums with commerce. The Thames is thick with ships. Coffee houses buzz with deals. And above it all floats a word that makes men giddy and blind. Stock. Specifically, the stock of the South Sea Company. Supposedly, it controls vast trade routes in South America. Supposedly, its value will rise forever. And supposedly, if you invest now, this instant, you'll be rich before the next sunrise. Men mortgage homes. Aristocrats pawn heirlooms. Servants sneak silver spoons to sell for shares. Even Isaac Newton, yes, that Newton, invests. And when he pulls out, calling the market absurd, he is laughed at. So he reinvests and loses everything. He later said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men." And oh, how mad it gets. One company begins selling shares in a venture of great importance, the purpose of which shall be revealed later. Another claims to make wool out of seawater. One man sells shares in a company that doesn't exist, vanishes overnight, leaving investors holding scraps of paper and broken dreams. The bubble bursts by autumn. Fortunes vanish in hours. Families beg in the same streets where they once strolled with gold-tipped canes. The parliament holds inquiries, but no law can undo madness. Let's pause now. Let your breath settle. Let your shoulders ease. Because though the stories sound absurd, flowers worth mansions, powdered death, invisible companies, they speak to something deeper. Desire. Desire to rise. Desire to be seen. Desire to escape hunger, anonymity, dullness. It's not evil. It's human. But when that desire is unchecked, it becomes a storm. Now step into Vienna, 1783. It's a spring afternoon, and a string quartet plays near the Hofburg Palace. No one notices the rumble at first. It started weeks ago, actually thousands of miles away in Iceland. The Loki Fissure opened on June 8th and for 8 months poured poisonous gases and ash into the sky. Farms died. Cattle collapsed. Horses bled from their noses. The haze spread, first to Greenland, then to Scotland, then over France and the German principalities. In Vienna, people coughed beneath lavender clouds. The sun dimmed. Harvests wilted again. Sound familiar? Within the year, Europe teetered on crisis. The following decade, that stress would break into revolution. Was Loki the cause? Not alone. But when bread costs half your daily wage, powdered wigs begin to lose their charm. By 1789, Paris would burn. And with it, so would the illusion that elegance equals justice. Let's stop now in a tavern. It's 1791. A man is playing the violin in the corner. His coat is patched, but his fingers are sure. A woman drinks sour wine from a tin cup. A young soldier scribbles something onto parchment. It's a petition. He can't spell well, but the point is clear. We want bread, not perfume. That cry would echo across a continent, because the age of powder was ending, and the age of iron was on its way. The Industrial Revolution loomed, smokestacks, engines, soot. A new kind of madness, not of silk and stock, but of steel and speed. And soon, luxury would not be the madness. Progress would. But that's for another night. For now, one more story. A boy in Lyon, France, age 9, walks to market. He doesn't look at the cathedral. He doesn't care for the noblemen's carriages. He's staring at a tulip, a real one, in a cracked pot. He doesn't know about markets or collapses or 1636. He just thinks it's beautiful. And maybe that's enough. Because not all beauty is madness. Now let your mind soften. You've watched petals rise and kingdoms fall. You've heard teeth shatter behind courtly smiles. You've seen fortunes blink out in candlelight. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still human, and somewhere a tulip still grows. Let's drift now, not to a palace or market, but to a chair. A dentist's chair, Paris, around 1785. The doctor isn't what we'd call one today. He doesn't wear gloves. His tools are iron. His breath smells of brandy. The patient is a young marquise, pale and trembling. She has a fashionable spot of rouge on her cheek and a raging abscess behind her molar. The dentist doesn't numb her. He smiles, and he pulls. Screaming fills the air. Not an uncommon sound. Not in these times. The molar comes loose with a crack and blood splatters her silk collar. Still, she thanks him. She needed to smile at the king's ball, even if it killed her. And in some cases, it did. Teeth rotted from sugar-rich diets and no hygiene. Wigs were filled with lice and mice. Corsets crushed ribs. Paints poisoned blood. The most elite members of society were walking fashionable corpses, powdered, perfumed, and doomed. And yet, the artists kept painting. The tailors kept sewing, because beauty was its own kind of religion, even as the world was crumbling beneath them. Meanwhile, in the shadow of this decadence, revolution brewed. Paris was a pressure cooker. The poor were tired of starving while kings played dress-up, tired of perfume drowning out hunger. In 1789, the pot boiled over. You know the story. The Bastille fell. Bread riots broke out. Heads rolled. But here's what you might not know. The aristocracy didn't believe it at first. One duchess, fleeing Versailles, reportedly asked, "Are the peasants revolting because they missed the opera?" Another, "Surely they'll come to their senses once winter arrives. No one rebels in the snow." They were wrong. Madness meets reality, and reality always wins. Let's visit a street corner. A woman sells pins. That's her entire trade. Pins. For sleeves, collars, hats. But the fashion has changed. Lace is out. Simplicity is in. And now her pins are worthless. She sits on her crate watching the crowd pass. A young man bumps her shoulder. She mutters, "Let them eat pins." She smiles to herself. But there's no laughter in it. Let's go north now, to Edinburgh, Scotland. It's the 18th century, and the Enlightenment is blooming. Philosophers debate liberty. Scientists build lightning machines. But among all that brilliance, there's also fear, because the streets are still lit by torch. Sewage runs in the gutters. Disease is never far. And across town, grave robbers creep through cemeteries. Not for money, but for medicine. Bodies are sold to anatomy schools, dead or not. In one account, a student named James writes, "We took a woman last night. Her nails were still soft. She was barely cold. But the professor said we must learn the workings of God." Learning and madness, once again, twined like ivy. Now let's pause again. Take a deep breath. These stories of greed, of rot, of powdered death, aren't meant to frighten. They're meant to reveal. Reveal how often we mistake glitter for gold. How easily we trade peace for prestige. How fashion becomes poison when empathy is lost. But also how we learn. How we adapt, even after collapse. Because just as the 18th century collapsed into revolution, the 19th rose like steam from a train engine. Wigs were gone. Lead was out. Democracy was stirring. New problems, sure, but new voices too. And behind it all, people kept doing what they always have, trying to make sense of the world. Let's leave this era with one last image. A seamstress in a cold attic. London, 1800. She works by candlelight. Her fingers are raw. The fabric is cheap. She once made dresses for a baroness. But the baroness fled during the revolution. Now she makes mourning veils for factory widows. Still she hums. Because the stitches matter. Because someone somewhere will wear her work. Because beauty doesn't have to be madness. Can be resilience. Now let the music fade. Let the velvet curtains fall. Let the powders and wigs and foolish tulips drift into memory. And remember, even in the worst excesses, there is always someone choosing kindness, choosing truth, choosing a simpler, safer kind of beauty. Close your eyes. You've walked through an age of absurdity. You've seen fortunes born of petals and ruined by powder. You've watched monarchs rot beneath rouge. You've witnessed stock bubbles and public hangings turn theater. But you've also seen the people, quiet, unseen, who built the world again. One stitch, one tooth, one honest flower at a time. Let's walk slowly now, one more time, through the remains of this gilded world. The ballroom has emptied. The wigs are in boxes. The chandeliers have grown dusty. But the echoes linger. A few laughs. A slipper left behind. A flute lying silent on a velvet chair. It's easy to mock the past. To call it foolish, decadent, rotten. But we forget these people too were trying to be happy, trying to matter, trying to make something beautiful in a world that was often unbearably hard. Their flaw wasn't the search for beauty. It was the price they paid for it. And now, as we step back from powder and lace, we should remember what came next. The 19th century arrived not with a fanfare, but with a furnace. Steam, coal, Industry, empire. Factories replaced salons. Speed replaced grace. Smog replaced perfume. We exchanged velvet madness for iron progress, and not always for the better. But the lesson remained. Whenever humanity loses touch with humility, it begins to collapse, quietly, elegantly, fatally. Let's return now to a quieter space. A field. Summer. Modern day. A child kneels to pick a tulip. Not a rare one, just a red tulip from a garden bed. She holds it gently, inspecting the petals. Her fingers are sticky from jam. Her nose wrinkles from the smell of fertilizer. She's not thinking of markets or madness or lost fortunes. She just thinks, this is pretty. And that's where we end. Not with collapse, not with fire, but with simplicity. Because beauty, in its purest form, doesn't need gold leaf or powdered wigs. It needs space and time and a mind quiet enough to notice. So tonight, sleep with this in mind. For every duchess who painted herself to death, for every merchant who gambled on tulips, for every nobleman who fell to a mob, there was always someone in the background, sweeping the ashes, baking the bread, patching the clothes, and it is they who kept the world turning. Let the candle flicker. Let the past settle. Let your thoughts soften like old velvet. You've seen the worst of opulence. You've wandered through powdered lies and market illusions, and you've made it out the other side. Wiser, calmer, still breathing. Tomorrow we'll visit a different world, a simpler time, or maybe a stranger one. But for now, you rest. Let the ghosts of wigs and wine and wilting tulips drift away. History, in all its madness, can wait.